Got it. Okay. Right, we're ready. So I'm just sharing all of the links everywhere so that people can join. Okay. So welcome everyone to the American Irish Historical Society and Irish American Heritage Museum's presentation with our genealogist Lisa Walsh-Doherty. We're going to talk tonight, or she's going to talk to you tonight, about finding your Irish ancestors online. We talked last night, if those of you who were on, with the historian Davy Holden, about what good work Ireland are doing, although of course there's huge gaps and patches and things because it's such an old country, and of course we had the loss of the records in 1922, 23. So Lisa has kindly provided us with a handout. So those of you who are on the Zoom, if you click on the chat button, I've shared a link to a Word document and you can download it from there. But any of you who are watching and don't have access to it, you can email us info@aihs.org and I'll send you the kind of guideline with the list of resources that you're using tonight. Lisa, I don't know how many years, 30 years experience of tracing Irish families. She ran a clinic, or still runs a clinic, once a month in the Irish American Heritage Museum in Albany. In fact, she'll be there next Wednesday and there might be one or two spots still left. She's a member of the New York Genealogy group and works around Albany and the capital region, doing these workshops, and has presented for us several times, both online and in person. Oh, chat is disabled. I don't know how I can open it because it's open at my end. So I'll try and figure that out.
Right. Well, you can also email me as well for the handout if you want. And my email is right at the bottom of the screen there, so you can email me. And the other thing you can do is you could always screenshot different slides too if you want to have the information from them. So that would work as well.
I'm going to see if I can enable the chat, even though it has already started. So anyway, Lisa, take it away. I'll mute myself and I'm going to disappear off camera and then I'll be back at the end. So thanks. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity, being able to speak to you tonight. I am coming to you from Lake Ontario in northern New York. And we're kind of between thunderstorms, I think, right now. So if I disappear during this, then you're going to know it's because the power went out or the internet went out or something like that. But hopefully we'll be able to get through the information before I disappear. So let's keep our fingers crossed. So tonight, I want to talk a little bit about how you can find your Irish ancestors online. Now, this is one of those things that there's a lot of misconceptions about what you can and cannot find online. One of the things that I do fairly frequently is troll through the Facebook Irish genealogy groups, and a lot of the same questions keep getting asked over and over and over in these groups. And a lot of them have to do with, I'm going to Ireland next week and I'm going to spend all my time doing research. And mostly the advice for that is, no, you don't need to do that. You want to do most of your research before you go. And most of it can be done online. So that's what we're going to discuss tonight. So these are a couple of the things that I frequently see posted in Irish genealogy groups on Facebook. That the only place you're going to get your records for your ancestor is when you get over on Irish soil. You'll have to spend your entire vacation sitting in the dusty, dark library. The only person that can do effective research is a genealogist who's a professional, and I'm going to have to pay a lot of money for it. Or the ever popular, all the records burned. That's something that I hear very frequently, not just with Ireland, but with other places as well. So these are kind of just the boilerplate language that goes along with Irish research. These are things that are repeated over and over, and for the most part, they're not accurate. So the fact is that most of the basic resources that you will need to use to trace your Irish ancestor are already online. And the reason for this is because Ireland has made an effort over the last probably 10 or 20 years to make the records that they have accessible to people around the world. It started to become apparent to a lot of librarians and archivists in Ireland in the 1980s that there were people all around the world that were interested in learning about their Irish ancestors. So they started making efforts even back that far to make things more available. And since the internet has come along, there's been an explosion in the amount of Irish research records available online. So basically, you can access a lot of these resources for free. You don't need to have a subscription to an expensive website. You don't need to pay per view for each record. Most of the resources you're going to be able to access for free. Sometimes, if you don't have the time or if you are not inclined to do it yourself, it may be wise to utilize the experience of a professional. And that's going to do a couple of things for you. That's going to save you time, because if a professional's been doing something like this for 25 or 30 years, then they're going to have a lot more familiarity with the things that need to be used. They're going to understand certain situations that maybe if you don't do this every day, you don't really understand. And it isn't really necessarily expensive. Of course, like anything else, you can spend as much or as little on it as you want. But it sometimes makes sense to engage the resources that a professional might give to you. So one of the things that is kind of true is that some of records that we might use for our Irish ancestry did burn up, and that was due to the Four Courts bombing that occurred during the Irish Civil War in 1922. And the actual records that were destroyed are here on this list. Census records 1821, 1831, 1841, 1851, a little more than half of the Church of Ireland registers, wills and probate documents, and pre-1900 documents from legal courts. Probably the biggest loss here are the first two, the censuses and the Church of Ireland registers. You will note that nothing is mentioned here about Roman Catholic records. Those were not affected at all by this event. So just the things that you see here on the left, and that's actually quite enough, and it does make a significant hole. But as long as you're aware of what records were affected by this tragedy, then you will go into your research informed. So what are those basic resources? What are the resources that we can use? What are the things that we can look at online? What is available? Well, the basic resources are census records that do exist, 1901 and 1911, the vital records of birth, marriage, and death, starting in about 1864 for the entire population, Roman Catholic parish records, the ones that exist, land records, cemetery records, and also something called Ireland Reaching Out or Ireland XO, which I'll talk about at the end. And that's an interesting and very, very good resource for people who are going to be visiting Ireland to use. Unfortunately, it's not advised to go right straight into Irish records. If all you know that your ancestor was born in Ireland about 1850, then you're going to need to do a little background work before you start looking at Irish records. So we need to have some basic knowledge about our Irish ancestors, which is going to include a few different things about their lives. There's a minimum amount of information that you're going to need to have a chance at success in Irish records. And the reason I say a minimum is because it's not advisable to start looking for someone named Michael Murphy, who was born in 1850, in Irish baptism records, because you're going to encounter many, many, many Michael Murphys. So you're going to need some information about your Michael Murphy that makes him distinctive. So you're going to find the information that you need when you're looking at Irish records. You're going to find that information in the place that your ancestor came to, whether that's New York or Boston or Liverpool or Sydney, Australia. Wherever your ancestor went to after they left Ireland is going to be the place where you're going to be looking for this information. one of the first very important things that you will need would be the names of your ancestors' parents. And it's going to need to include a mother's maiden name. That's going to be essential. If you're looking for Michael Murphy, there may be thousands of Michael Murphys, but there may only be one with parents named John Murphy and Margaret Condon, for example. So if you have those two names, that's going to make things easier for you. You will also need an approximate year of your ancestor's birth. Generally, we're talking about a range here, so that's why I say approximate. We don't need to know the exact year, but a range of about 10 years is pretty good. You would probably want to have some idea of the names of the ancestor siblings. So did your ancestor come over to the United States and live with a brother or a sister? Were there other family members that came over? Identifying those family members and having their names and some basic information about them, that's going to help you a great deal when you start looking at Irish records. Also, ideally, we would want a county or a town name from a source in the United States. And that can be very difficult to find. But sometimes we find information about the name of a county or a parish or a town on an ancestor's gravestone, or we find it in their obituary, or we can find it on a birth or death or marriage record. Something like that might have that information. So all of those are sources that need to be checked to try to get that information. I would say county is probably the minimum that you would need. So as I was mentioning, Irish names can be extremely common. These are some of the statistics, just looking at these statistics. So for example, in the 1901 census, there's over 4,000 John Murphys living in the country. The 1880 births show quite a lot of Patrick Connors. Griffith's valuation, which is a land record for the mid-19th century, shows almost 1,700 Michael Ryans. So how do you tell which one of those Michael Ryans is your Michael Ryan? You will need to have more information about him before you can go searching in Irish records. A few of the barriers that get in people's way when they start looking for information about their ancestor in our sources in our country or in sources in Ireland, these are probably pretty much the same, not just Irish, but definitely when you're doing Irish research. One of the biggest is spelling of people's first names, last names, names of towns, names of parishes. All of these are going to have multiple spellings. The sooner you get used to looking at different spellings of your ancestor's surname, the better off you're going to be. I usually even have the observation that even if your ancestor's name is Smith, you're going to be seeing variations in spelling. So that's something that you really need to be very loose about. You cannot have a rigid idea at all of spelling. You have to keep your interpretations very loose. Again, we have the common names. There are so many Ryans, there are so many Murphys, so many Kellys, so many Walshes. So all of these are extremely common names, and they could be located anywhere in Ireland. Dates are also another thing that you need to really keep a very open mind about. Birth years, especially even a self-reported birth year, they're nearly always off. So if your ancestor is reporting that they're 45 in the 1900 census, you want to always go plus or minus 5 years either way, and sometimes maybe as many as 10. You will find that your ancestors will tend to be older than you think they are. And the truth is that most people during this time period didn't really have any good idea of how old they were. They would just kind of guess, and it was a rounded number. So this is not something that, in our world in 2024, we're so used to giving our birth dates and our exact name and all of these things. This just wasn't something that was part of our ancestors' lives. So a lot of things are approximate. Another thing that people tend to do is that they rely too heavily on family stories. Now, of course, all of us have family stories. We've grown up with them. We've heard them every holiday since we were old enough to notice. And of course, you start to really believe a lot of these things. And I'm not saying that these are deliberate lies. I'm just saying that over years, stories get altered. So what starts out as something that's probably fairly accurate, over 50 or 100 or 150 years, the story can get altered. So sometimes we find that our family stories have a kernel of truth in them, but we just need to know what that kernel is, and doing research will help us get there. If you don't have enough collateral information about your ancestors' siblings or a specific place or their parents' names, if you don't have enough information about the community around your ancestor, that's going to make it very hard to research in Ireland. And then, of course, there's the unrealistic expectations. The people that say, I'm going to Ireland in 2 weeks and I want to visit my ancestral town. Well, I've been at this 30 years, and there are still some of my own ancestors that I don't have real solid information about. So it isn't going to happen in 2 weeks unless you're extremely lucky. So before you attempt to go and look in Irish records, and everybody thinks, hey, they're free, I can go look at the Roman Catholic baptism records, I can just go look to my heart's content. Well, that will be all you'll be doing, is looking, if you don't have a goal, if you don't have a direction. And doing research beforehand will give you a direction. So I would say that it's necessary to obtain every kind of document you can think about your ancestor in the place where they immigrated to. So anything that you can think about that your ancestor might appear on, be it a census record or an obituary or a newspaper article or some kind of employment record, or did they belong to the Hibernians? Did they belong to any other kind of club? Anything like that, it would be necessary to try to find those things. You'll need to have a good idea of your ancestors' fan club. And by fan club, I mean the friends, the family, the associates, and the neighbors of your ancestor, because a lot of times these people will point you to a place of origin. One tip that I've picked up over the years is that there's a really good chance that your immigrant ancestor's spouse came from the same area in Ireland as he or she did. So you'll want to pay attention to the in-laws. So instead of looking at an ancestral couple, an immigrant couple, as two separate entities, look at them as if they are coming from the same place, because chances are they probably are coming from the same place. So if you can't find things about your great-great-grandfather, try looking for your great-great-grandmother. There may be some information about her. And lastly, there is not going to be any document in Ireland that's going to tell you that your ancestor, John Murphy, went to Troy, New York. But there might be a record in Troy that says where your John Murphy came from in Ireland. So there's nothing over in Ireland that's going to wave its hand at you and say, this is where your ancestor that went to Troy came from. You have to do that here in this country. So that's the background information that you need. So now we'll actually look at these records. We'll take a look and we'll see what they're all about. So the census records from 1901 and 1911 are the only census records for the whole country that are currently available. There was a census record that was taken, there was a census that was taken in the 1920s after the Irish Civil War. I believe it was 1926. That set will be released in 2026. So there's a 100-year privacy law in place. So those records will be released in 2 years. The 19th century records were either destroyed deliberately to make use of the paper for World War I, or as a result of the bombing in Dublin in 1922, which is a horrible shame, because our lives would be a lot easier if we had some older census records. There are a few small fragments that are left for some of the 19th century records, but they're so few and far between that it's almost not worth looking for them. I think in 30 years of research, I've only found maybe 1 or 2 people on a census record fragment. There are some old age pension applications. In the 19 teens, Ireland started offering an old age pension. And people had to prove how old they were in order to receive the pension. So what happened was they would apply, and then the officials would go looking in the still existing census records and look for them. And what is left with us is some of this information from those older census records. If someone in your family applied for a pension. So that's another possibility. And then another thing to think about, a lot of us, our ancestors left way before 1901. A lot of our ancestors were gone out of Ireland by the 1850s, 60s, even earlier. So what possible benefit could we get from a census that starts just in 1901? Well, if we think about it in the way that our ancestors probably didn't move around a lot when they lived in Ireland, and it's possible that maybe when they left and came to the United States or went wherever they went, that they left some family members behind. And sometimes if you know your ancestor's hometown, you can go to that hometown in 1901 and you can find people with the same surname living there. So for example, my great-great-grandmother, Anne Mortimer, left Ireland in the mid-1860s. But she left an older brother behind. And her older brother was still living in the town where she was born in 1901. So that gives me information about the family because he was still there. So those are things to think about when we think about using these census records. So here's an example from 1901, and it looks like a typical census record. If you do genealogy research, then you're probably pretty familiar with how they're laid out and the types of basic questions that they ask. And Ireland's are a little different from United States census records in that they ask what the family's religion is. So that can be very useful when you go to look for church records. And in this case, the Dugan family are Presbyterians. So that's very good to see. It gives the approximate ages. Again, we are not talking exact ages here. These are probably pretty approximate. It gives the occupations of the people in the family, whether they are married or not, but it also gives a county of their birth, which can be very useful. So if you find somebody in Dublin, maybe they weren't born there, they're just living there, it will tell you what county that they're living in. It will also tell you if they speak Irish or English. And this particular family lived in County Armagh and was Presbyterian, and so they did not speak Irish, and that's not noted on here. So that's 1901. And if we go to 1911, we can see that we still have some of the same questions, but we also have a couple of more personal questions. So for example, one of the questions that the woman of the house is asked is how many years has she been married? And how many children does she have? How many children has she given birth to? And how many children are still living? So that can be extremely useful information. So in this case, Mary Melvin has given birth to 2 children and both of them are still living. And she's been married for 18 years. So that will give you some very good information. So again, this is 1911. And we can possibly find family members, even if our own ancestor has come to the United States or left Ireland way earlier than this. We can still get an idea of the people that are living in their town, which could be very useful information. So here's an example of one of those old age pension information sheets. And you can see it's kind of like written all over the place and there's things crossed out and it's kind of hard to follow. It does give you the basic information about the place. In this case, it's County Westmeath and the place where this person was living. And it also tells you where the person lives now. So for example, this person was applying for a pension from Watervliet, New York. So you can see people in different countries did apply for pensions if they had been born in Ireland. So you can see that there is some notations about different family members, Philip, Anne, Elizabeth, Margaret, etc. So these can give you some information about different census years and who appeared where and in which census. But you have to be lucky enough to be able to find your ancestor on one of these pension applications. And these are located on the National Archives website, and that's in the handout. The address for that is in the handout. So then there are vital records. Now, vital records are called vital because they record vital events in a person's life. So they record their birth, their death, and their marriage. And of course, this is something that we're pretty familiar with. We all have birth certificates, we all have marriage certificates, and so far we don't have death certificates, but we will eventually. So these are government records. So when you see the word vital or civil, that means a government record as opposed to a church record. So in Ireland, we're pretty lucky because the vital records started in 1864. Now that's earlier than New York State. In New York State, they started in 1880. So in 1864, all births, marriages, and deaths in the country had to be recorded. The law required it. Prior to that time, really the way it was looked at was marriages that were performed in a Protestant church or not in a Catholic church or in a registry office would be registered starting in 1845. So if you have an ancestor who was a member of the Church of Ireland or was a Presbyterian or got married in a registry office as opposed to a church, then you will find a marriage record from 1845 for them. And this can be incredibly useful because a lot of the Protestant records were destroyed in the Four Courts bombing. So this is incredibly useful for marriages starting in 1845. But all other events begin in 1864 for all religions. The vital records have a privacy law that is in place, and that means that no one is allowed to see a birth record that is less than 100 years old, a marriage record less than 75 years old, or a death record less than 50 years old. Those records are available online free of charge to look at. So any birth over 100 years, any marriage over 75 years, any death over 50 years is available to see online. Compliance with the law, I find, honestly, and this is based on years of using these records, I find that compliance is pretty good. You will almost always be able to find the birth, marriage, or death record you're looking for. This is not true in New York. In New York, compliance was horrible for the first 20 years that the law was in place, and even later than that. But in Ireland, I find that the compliance tends to be pretty good. One thing you want to be aware of is fudged birth dates. And when I say fudged, that just simply means that there was a time period that you needed to get into the registry office to report a birth. I'm not sure exactly how long, possibly a month. You had up to a month after the birth to register. Sometimes people didn't make it there in time. So rather than pay the fine that would have been imposed for a late registration, they would just simply give the child a later birth date in order to accommodate that. So sometimes what you'll end up with is you'll find a baptism that predates a birth. And if you see something like that, then this may very well be the reason why, because they just didn't get to the registry office in the allotted time. So what happens if your ancestor was born before 1864? Well, then you're going to have to rely on church records, and we'll be talking about that in a little bit. But sometimes what I do when I am researching somebody who was obviously born before 1864 is I start by looking for their death. Because sometimes, you know, even if they were born in the 1700s, they may still be alive in 1864. So then I start looking for their death to see if I can find them that way. And the great news about all this is that these records are absolutely free to access all the time. You can access them at any time and they will be free to use. So here is a birth sample. This is a sample birth record, and these records look a little bit different than American records. Typically, they're shown, I think there's about 20 on a page, maybe not quite that many, 15 maybe on a page. And they're all on these lines in these little squares. As you see, the first square shows the date, and then the child's name, child's gender, the name of the father with the place that he lived, the name of the mother with her maiden name, the occupation of the father, the person who registered the birth. Sometimes it's the father, sometimes it's the mother, sometimes it's somebody who was there at the death or at the birth. Then it'll give you the day of the registration and then the signature of the registrar. So that's pretty basic information, but it does give you some really good information, such as the mother's maiden name and a town land address, and also the occupation of the father. So this is a typical birth record and how they look. This is a typical marriage record. Now, marriage records are good because they give you information about two parties, which, that gives you more bang for your buck, so I would say. So if you can find a marriage record, that's a really, really good record to find because it will give you information about the bride and the groom. Unfortunately, unlike marriage records in the United States, you only are going to get the name of the father of the bride or the groom. You will not get a mother's name, but at least it's something. And particularly in this case with the groom's name, John Redpath, and his father's name, Washington. I have seen no one in Ireland with the name of Washington. So this is a very, very good find. It also tells you whether they have been married before under their condition. If the gentleman is a bachelor, that means he's not been married. If a woman is a spinster, that means she's not been married. It will say widow or widower if they have been widowed or widower. It will also give their occupations, if they both work, if one of them works. It gives you their addresses, where they live. And then it will give you the name of the father and also the occupation of the father. Also interesting here is the names of the witnesses. The witnesses are always good to make note of because they can certainly be some type of relative. So here you can see that there's Elizabeth Rogers, who's being married, and one of the witnesses is Elizabeth Rogers Jr. You'll sometimes see a junior used with a female if she's been named after her mother. So you'll sometimes see that. It doesn't get used with any kind of regularity, but you can see it. So just, don't freak out when you see that. It's definitely something that happens. And the other thing to note about this record is that this record occurred in a registry office in the town of Lurgan. So this is a pre-1864 record. It's a registry office record. So there was no church involved here. And then here's a sample of a death record. Now, death records are probably the most disappointing out of all of these records. And simply because if we're used to looking at American death records, you're used to seeing the parents' names, or at least a space for the parents' names. You don't get that on Irish death records. You will only get the date and the place of the death, the name of the person who died, their gender, their condition, whether bachelor, spinster, married, widow, whatever. How old were they at their last birthday? What was their occupation? What the cause of death was. And then the informant. The informant is generally someone who was present at the time of the death. And that will usually give a name, and it will give a place of residence. Sometimes it will give the relationship of the informant to the deceased. Like on the top line, it shows Thomas Murphy, who was the father of the deceased, but it does not always give you the relationship. So death records are, they're good to know when a person died and of what, but they don't give you a lot of good genealogical information. Okay, so now moving on to Roman Catholic parish records. So most of the population in Ireland was Roman Catholic, vast majority. So this is going to be where you're probably going to be doing a lot of your research. Now, it's also a very slippery slope because there's no such thing as any kind of completeness to these records at all. There are many variations into when certain parish records start, how many records they have from certain years. There are lots of gaps in these records. Writing is a real issue with these records, so there's a lot of things to be wary of when you're searching. In 1949, the National Library of Ireland started microfilming Roman Catholic parish records in an effort to preserve them. And as a result, they were able to microfilm over 3,500 registers from over 1,000 parishes across the entire country. So this includes both Northern Ireland and the modern Northern Ireland and the modern Republic. So it includes the entire island of Ireland. So this is probably the biggest collection that there is out there. It's by no means complete. They were not given access to every parish record that went in the country. So there are some that don't have any kind of presence in the National Library collection. In 2015, the digitized images of this collection were made available on the National Library of Ireland website, and they are still there. They are available there free of charge. You can go there at any time. You can search through every parish you want to, and you will not ever get charged for it. The disadvantage here is that they are not indexed, so you cannot search by name. You have to search page by page by page. However, when the collection was put online in 2015, indexes were made by Ancestry.com and by FindMyPast.com. So both of these pay websites have indexes to these records on their websites. So you can effectively search by name using these two websites. That being said, I find I use both of them simultaneously at different times because they both will give you different results. So if you put in a name and a year, you'll end up getting a different result on Ancestry and a different result on Find My Past. It's just the way their search engines work and the way they were indexed. But it is free to use on the National Library of Ireland website. The collection generally includes records only up to 1880. And the reason behind this was that the Catholic dioceses in Ireland decided that 1880 was a good cutoff date because after that, there are civil records available. So you will be able to find civil records of birth and marriage after 1880. So for privacy concerns, that was the cutoff date that was given, 1880. There are some exceptions. You will find some online that go a little bit later, but generally 1880 is about the cutoff. And again, this collection is not complete. There's no such thing as a complete collection of Roman Catholic parish records anywhere because it just simply doesn't exist. You have to kind of take it on a case-by-case basis. So if you happen to know where your ancestor lived, you can figure out what Roman Catholic parish covered that area, and then you can check to see what records are available, when they start, when they end, are there any gaps, etc. You can find that out and go looking. One of the things that we do with human nature is, of course, when we find out the parish that our ancestor lived in, the first thing we want to do is we want to go searching. So we immediately go and we start searching. But then later on, when we're not finding anything, we realize that our ancestor was born in 1820 and the records don't start till 1835. So too late, we figure out that we've been looking and there's no record for our ancestor. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're searching. So here's a sample baptism record. This is just a sample. They are all different. Some of them are in fairly decent shape, like this one is pretty readable, not bad at all. Others you will find extremely faded with writing crammed onto the page, no spaces between the entries. You will see a lot of abbreviations that priests use to record these records. And each priest had his own system of recording records. So you'll need to get used to what that priest system is when you're looking through the records. This one's pretty straightforward. Like, for example, the one on the bottom says John, and then the PP is an abbreviation for parents, Pat Connor. And the word after Pat Connor is the name of where Pat Connor lived. So that's something that you'll need to figure out. Where is that? Is it that SKERK, something like that? And then it gives the mother's name, Rose Fay, and then the sponsors, Peter, Fay, and Mary Caroline. So that's generally the format that the baptisms will follow. Sometimes, hopefully, you hope to have the name of that town in there because that's really helpful when it comes to identifying who your ancestor is. But a lot of times you don't get that in these baptism records. So moving on to marriage records, this is an example of a really hard one to read. At least they drew lines between the entries, so that's a little bit helpful. But you can see at the beginning, you can see a date, and then you can see the word married. and then you will see the names of the parties, and usually followed by the names of the witnesses. Sometimes you'll get a place name in there, but you really have to maybe use image editing software to enhance the image to maybe be able to read it a little bit better. But again, these records have been indexed to a point. So remember that humans were doing the indexing, and humans can only read what humans can read. So you have to really take those indexes with a huge grain of salt. You have to really give them a very wide latitude in order to try to find something. And sometimes if you know the parish, you're much better off going in and searching page by page. And yes, it's not an easy task. So another collection, so we were just talking about the National Library of Ireland collection. There is another collection hosted on a website called Irish Genealogy. And this website is sponsored by the Irish government. And it was put online to host the vital records. So you remember a few slides ago, we were talking about the vital records of birth, marriage, and death. You will find that collection on this website, the Irish Genealogy website. That's where you'll find the free to view civil records. But this website also includes some church records, including the Roman Catholic Diocese of Kerry, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Cork and Ross, the Roman Catholic records for Dublin City, Church of Ireland records for County Kerry, County Carlow, and Dublin City. Now, why this particular group of records is on this particular website, that's a really good question. Maybe just to make it confusing, but these are all available free of charge. So if you have a Kerry ancestor, if you have a West Cork ancestor, this is going to be the site that you're going to be using to look at the church records. This website will search record transcriptions. So what you're searching will be transcriptions, but in some cases, they are linked to the images at the National Library of Ireland website. You won't always see that, but sometimes you will see that. Okay, so this is an example of the transcribed record that you will see on the Irish Genealogy website. And it gives you the name of, this is a marriage record, it'll give you the names of the parties, it will give you their address. It gives, oh, actually, this is a church record. Okay, so this is a church record. So this is giving us the names of both parents because those happen to be in the record itself. So this is incredibly useful information. And you'll also see that it's much later than the 1880 cutoff that the National Library of Ireland has. It's 1899. So you will find some of these later records on there. And I did see that there are some questions, and I will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So definitely, I know that they're there, so I'll get to them. Okay. So now another website that has still another collection of church records is called Roots Ireland. Roots Ireland is a subscription website, which means that you need to pay to access the records that are here. Most of the records on Roots Ireland are available on the National Library of Ireland website. However, there are a few unique collections to Roots Ireland. The Roots Ireland website grew out of the formation of county heritage centers that developed in Ireland in the 1980s. They were developed in response to people being priests and different government officials being inundated with requests for information. So what they did was they formed county heritage centers, which took their local records around their local area, including church records and other types of records, and they entered all of these records into a database. And that's what is hosted on Roots Ireland website, is the information from these databases. You have to pay to access it. As I said, most of this information on the site is available for free elsewhere. So it includes some of the vital records. It includes some church records. It includes Griffiths valuation, which you can get on the other sites for free. There are some unique church record collections on here. Again, it's just going to be a matter of identifying your parish and then seeing what you can find based on what your parish is. Some of these databases, these databases are used by genealogists at the county heritage centers. So for example, if you go to Ireland and you go to one of the county heritage centers and you commission a research report, those genealogists are going to use the exact same database that you have access to online. So, do you pay for a subscription and use it yourself? Or do you pay for somebody at a county heritage center to use the same exact records to look for your ancestor? That's up to you. But just to make you aware that people in county heritage centers are not going to go to the library and search records that you don't know anything about. They're only searching the records that are available to them in this database. So that's something to be aware of. So here is an example of a church marriage record from Roots Ireland. This is what you're going to see when you pay your money. You're going to see a transcribed record. Sometimes there will be a link to an actual image, but for the most part, it is going to be just transcription. So keep that in mind. There are problems with transcribed records in that you can't see the actual record to interpret what you think some of the things say. You can't see the record right above your ancestor's record and the record right below your ancestor's record. So you don't know if maybe they showed up to get married at the same time as their brother or sister. You won't see that. So there are some definite advantages to transcribed records. But again, they're available and they're there for you to use. Okay, so land records. Of course, we know that most of our ancestors in Ireland did not own the land that they lived on. When Griffith's valuation was taken in the middle of the 19th century, it was taken for the purposes of taxation. So even if you didn't own the property that you lived on, you were still expected to pay taxes on your property. So in order to make those taxes, however they wanted to describe them, fair is kind of a very bad word to use here. But in order to make a good estimation as to what those taxes should be, every part of Ireland had to be looked at and valued. So people went around and they took values of different plots of land and they listed the people that were occupying these plots. Now, they were not necessarily owners. They were people that were actually living on the plots. And these are included both farms and rural areas as well as urban areas. So what comes out of Griffith's valuation is we end up with the names of over 1 million land occupiers. And if we look at it as a census substitute, because of course we don't have the censuses in the 19th century, we can see it as maybe a census that includes heads of a household. So that's maybe how we can look at it. So what you will find is the names of over 1 million land occupiers, usually male, but occasionally you will find a female. And it will tell you information about the land that they lived on. It will tell you about whether they had a house, whether they had a barn, whether they had farm outbuildings, what types of things they had. It will give you an acreage value. It will give you a monetary value. That's what it's going to be giving you. It's not going to give you the names of the person's family. It's only just going to give you the name of the person. So you can imagine if you're looking for Michael Ryan in the Griffiths valuation, you're going to have to figure out where he lived exactly in order to be able to identify him as your ancestor. The good news about Griffiths is that it is available for free on the Ask About Ireland website. This is the best place to look for it because not only will you be able to look at the valuation pages, but you will also be able to look at the maps, which identify exactly where your ancestor lived. So one of the things that, maybe there's not a lot of, really detailed information about ancestors in the 19th century in Ireland. One thing we do have is we can tell exactly where our ancestor lived by using older maps and modern maps. So up here on the valuation of tenements in the parish of Kilfidane in County Clare, we have a great-great-great-grandmother of mine, Margaret Pinder. And she is shown to be living on plot 1A. So if we look at the map on the right, we can see that we have plot 1A right up at the top there. And then if we toggle the map to include a modern Google map, we can see a topographic area of that same plot. If you use the modern Google Maps, it will show you exactly what roads go by this property that your ancestor may have lived on. You can have people bring you to the exact spot. A lot of local people know these areas in their area very well. We had a person in the B&B we were staying at take us to this plot and show us exactly where this was. So these are really great, and they're wonderful to be able to find your ancestor if you can identify which one your ancestor is. Griffith's valuation was updated. So it didn't just sit there. After it was taken in the mid 1800s, it was updated every few years. And when someone left the property, their name was crossed out and the next person's name was written over it. These books are available for the entire country. However, they are not available online for the Republic. If you had an ancestor that lived in Northern Ireland, the revision books are available online, which is great. So you can see on this example, we have the little town of Knocknamuckley, and on the bottom, John Redpath has moved out, his name's been crossed out, and VAC for vacant has been written next to it. So these are very useful for identifying possible dates of immigration, possible dates of death. These can be very useful for that. Again, only the books for Northern Ireland are available online, and we're hoping and praying that someday the books for the Republic will be available online as well. An older set of land records called the tithe allotment is also available. There are no corresponding maps for this. It's also somewhat limited in that it only includes land occupiers of 1 acre or more. So if your ancestor was not a farmer or had no land or lived in a town, they're not going to be included in the tithe. It's only going to be people who occupied 1 acre or more of land. So it's a little more difficult to use, but it is available for free on the National Archives of Ireland website and also on Family Search. And here's an example of the tithe. This one is very beautifully written. They're not all beautifully written. This one is pretty good. It just gives the names of the persons occupying the plot. It gives the amount of acreage that they have and also the value of the property. Sometimes these are written in alphabetical order, which isn't great and not helpful for positioning for where they lived. But sometimes they can be written in the order that they are living in. But it is a little harder to use than Griffith's. And then finally, cemetery records. Cemetery records are one of these things that, very, very, very difficult to find. Records themselves are few and far between. In general, you're going to find a lot more Protestant cemetery records than you will Catholic. Also, graveyards and cemeteries, unless they're modern, are not very well kept. If you think about it, if your family left Ireland 150 years ago and there was no one left to tend to the gravestones, then they very well could be damaged or missing altogether. And also, most people could not afford to erect a gravestone. So there's probably not a lot of information to be had from that source. There are some places online where you can search existing gravestones. These are much more likely to be modern. And modern, I would say, is probably anywhere from about 1900 forward, and usually even later. So you're definitely going to be finding mostly modern records on these websites. Here's a sample of a burial record. These are usually pretty, very, very not detailed, usually just the names of the deceased and the date of the burial. Sometimes they'll tell how old the deceased was, but in general, most parishes, and especially Roman Catholic parishes, don't have this information. It just wasn't something that was kept. And then finally, to wrap up with Ireland XO. So the website called Ireland XO, or also called Ireland Reaching Out, is a website that will help you get in touch with people that are living in your ancestors' area today. They have a lot of these kind of stories on the website about people that have found success in hooking up with a volunteer to help them look in Ireland. So this is a great resource. You can post messages looking for volunteers, looking for information. You can create a profile for your ancestor. It consists of people who are volunteering to perform this service, to either look up records or to meet you when you go to Ireland and bring you around to different places. And this does actually work. I had a client that did it last fall with a volunteer in County Limerick. She got shown around all over the place to see different places in her ancestor's life. And you simply post a message. Say, oh, I'm coming to Ireland in the fall of 2024, and I know my ancestor is from this particular parish. Sometimes you will find a volunteer that will help. Again, these little parish sites are only going to be as good as their volunteer force. They're not all manned by people who volunteer. So just keep that in mind when you're posting. Hopefully you will have success, but it's totally dependent on the people who volunteer to perform this service. And then just a couple of other sites that are worth mentioning. If you have ancestors in Northern Ireland, you're going to want to check out the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, also known as PRONI. Lots of great resources on there, records you can search, the valuation revision books, a whole series of videos and lectures. So a lot of really good things there. For everything having to do with how do I do something in Irish genealogy, then you would want to consult the Irish Genealogy Toolkit. It's not a record site, but it's a site that will explain things like Griffiths valuation or civil registration to you. It will give you a whole map of all the civil registration districts. So it will give you a lot of good information about how to access records and how to use records. And then finally, for information about Irish names and the availability of records in different areas, you'll want to consult John Grenham's Irish Ancestors website. John Grenham is probably the best known Irish genealogist. He's written a definitive guide to Irish genealogy that has been in print for 30 years. So he's got a lot of really great up-to-date information on his website. You can put any given parish into his search engine and it will bring you up all of the information that is available for that parish in any source. So online, offline, in libraries, in different collections, it will give you lots of information. It's particularly good for figuring out what church records are available for what areas. So that's a really good use of that website. And it also has a little fun name generator. You can put your ancestor's name in and it will show you where in Ireland that name is most prominent. I think it gives you like 5 free searches a week. So that's a lot of fun to work with. Okay. Hopefully you're all still awake. So let's see. Okay. Oh yeah, Elizabeth, you saw the stack thing. I did that
I
on
did.
purpose,
I loved
just
it.
for you.
I don't actually think they're my stacks, which is a bit of a
Probably
pity.
not, but you know,
Yeah.
I just put it in there.
I'm going to try and add this again. It was attached at the start, and then when I was able to, I think I've enabled the chat, funnily enough, somehow.
Okay.
So even though it was attached originally, it is not now. So I'll try putting it back in. But if anyone has any questions, please,
Yes,
that was
please.
the whole pile of information, so it's fantastic. And it seems, Lisa, like there are actually a lot of, well, some, good resources.
Oh yeah.
Everything is incomplete, of course, is the problem.
Yeah, you learn to work around it. I mean, there's no such thing as even here in the United States as being complete. There's just no such thing. So
Yeah.
you learn to you learn to work around it. I always tell people, if you have like one side of your family is German and one, or one side is French Canadian, don't do that first. Do the Irish stuff first.
Oh,
Because
okay.
that way you won't be disappointed when you go to the Irish stuff, because
Yeah.
you know, it can be disheartening if you've had some experience with other ethnicities and you realize the Germans have records back to the 1500s, and here
Yeah,
you are with nothing in the 1800s. So,
yeah. That is a bit of a pity. I'm just going to see. I think there are no questions that I can see.
okay.
Does anyone want? So use the chat or the Q&A.
Yes. Or
Um,
also, if you think of something later, take down my email address and just shoot me an email, and I'll be glad to answer
yeah.
any
So
questions you
the
have.
handout was the very first thing in the chat before my message. So above my first message it says handout, and now I've attached it again. So there's two, but it's the same handout. Mary Beth
Okay.
says she's
Well,
not seeing it.
Mary Beth, if you can't get it, just email me and I'll send it to you.
Yeah. So it's literally Mary Beth in the above the blue bubble where I say it should be attached right now. Right above that, there's a bubble with the handout and a little green tick. And if you touch that, it'll download to your computer. I can see it. I don't know,
Yeah, I'm
and
seeing it.
I
I
can
can
see
see it
your
too.
answer. Yeah.
It's
So
there.
it is there. Yeah. Okay, let me just check if there's anyone on YouTube with a question.
Sure.
No.
Okay.
You're all very quiet tonight. That's lovely.
Too
So,
too much information is what it is.
yeah. Well, but look, it's a great start, and I think it's very kind of you, to share because it is overwhelming. And Ancestry, you've got to be a member in charge. Sometimes the Ireland XO, I will say, like, I think that's such a fascinating site and a great service. The pop-up ads wreck my head a small bit.
Yeah, Ancestry is really not the place to go looking, honestly.
Yeah,
Not for Irish stuff. I mean, yes,
yeah,
absolutely do a lot of your United States stuff there for sure, but it's not going to be the place for Irish. Their search engine will not pull out the stuff that you need. It
yeah,
just can't.
yeah.
Not the way the names are, not the way, no, it just doesn't work. Sometimes you just need human intervention, and certainly in this case, you definitely do. So.
Yeah, yeah. And now, Alicia is asking, does Ireland maintain, arrest or conviction records for access?
Well, there are some court records, there are some prison records. You will find actually a lot of prison records on Find My Past. That's a website that's UK based, and it's a subscription website, so you do have to pay for it, but they do have free weekends a lot of the time. So if you sign up to get email alerts for them, or if you go onto their Facebook page, you can find out when they have those free resources, the free weekends. And they do have prison records. They have petty session court records. Pretty much everybody shows up in petty session court records.
Hmm.
And those are basically things like drunken fights or your animals
Yeah.
are trespassing on my land and things like that. But almost everybody shows up in those.
Yeah. And Lisa, I think, that's an actually from a historian's point of view rather than a genealogist. I think it's very interesting. Like, I can't remember whose work I saw, but they were talking about, during the Great Hunger, that actually petty crime like that, like kind of bleeding animals, they would cut, the back of the cow's leg and
Oh,
give
yeah.
them blood so they could basically feed themselves. But that kind of petty crime absolutely, quadruples or, goes sky high during the Great Hunger because people were guaranteed food in the jail and
Yes.
maybe even transportation to Australia. And so
Yes.
it's kind of a risk. So it's not to say that, all Irish people were criminals, but that this was actually
No, and
almost a
it's
kind of
really like
a
not even real
caretaking.
criminal activity like what we would see. It's
Yeah,
just very like literally it is what it says, petty.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
it really is. It's not even what we would consider a criminal offense at all.
Yeah. And for those of you who are interested in reading, there's a brilliant book. We had the ladies speak for us in February or March, but we weren't allowed, keep the film. But the book is called Bad Bridgets. And it talks, I don't know what archives they've utilized. It's just all about Irish maids who were arrested in America and Canada.
Oh, wow.
And it's so amazing. Actually, at one point, 83% of the prison population of New York were Irish maids. Boston, maybe not New York. Boston were Irish maids.
Oh my
And
goodness.
similarly, massively high figures in Canada. And so sometimes it was, a lot of prostitution or assumed prostitution, a lot of kind of drunken disorderliness. And sometimes just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like they would literally be walking behind groups. But, I'm talking about women as young as like 15, girls,
Wow.
not women, girls. So that's a fascinating read. It's called Bad Bridget. It's a bright yellow, kind of like a
Oh,
highlight pen.
that sounds really good.
Yeah.
So
And
check
so
that
they
out.
might have a list, and actually I have it. I I have it somewhere in my office. They might have a list of resources in the back of the book, so you might even be able to look at that, you know.
Oh yeah, sure. I bet. Yeah.
Mhm.
So there is a fair amount of stuff out there. I mean, I
Yeah.
definitely Find My Past would be the place to look for it.
Okay, find my past. So look, that's fascinating. Those of you who are in Albany, make sure to take advantage of Lisa. She's in Often Colony Library. She's in our own place the last Wednesday of every month, although that
Yes.
will probably not happen in July and August because of summer. But
Well,
for sure,
I'm
next
having,
Wednesday
if
you're here.
anybody wants an appointment, I'm available. So, it's not a
Okay,
big deal. And
and
also,
you are there next Wednesday.
yes,
Mhm,
and I just wanted to mention that I am going to be at the Irish Festival, the East Durham Irish Festival this weekend.
mhm.
It's in East Durham, New York. If anybody's been to that, this is the first time they're having a genealogist there. So it's
Mhm.
really exciting. I'm looking forward to it and looking forward to meeting a lot of people, and drop by if you want to chat.
Yeah, absolutely do. Um, yeah, so oh, hang on, we've got one more. Very
Okay.
informative note from Lorraine. Thank you so much. Yeah, it is, it's a daunting thing to start. And I think, the Irish God love us with all the Murphys and the O'Kellys and the
Oh,
Danny
yes.
Mick, it's very difficult sometimes to get the, who's who. I will say in one of those census, I can't remember if it's 1901 or 1911, my father was looking at it and my, great, whoever they were, I think actually my great great grandfather had died, so Bridget was probably a widow at this point, but she lists all her children. And the boys, of course, are scholars, even though they're high school age. And one of her daughters was only about 13 or 14 and under occupation. They wrote, does as she pleases. Which I thought, so like they're very charming. Like it's not all, manual labor or carpenter.
Be
Sometimes,
interesting to find out
people,
what happened to her.
I know. I think she comes to America. But I will have to check. Yeah, does as she pleases. I was like, ooh, you little madam.
Yeah,
And the
exactly.
other thing too, very interesting. I know, for instance, in our family, they owned a business, down the street from where they lived, but they lived in a house. And I believe they may call themselves like shop assistants or shopkeepers. And, but they were actually related, they were distant cousins.
Oh yeah.
The names were not the same, but, so sometimes
Yes.
you say like your network is kind of bigger. Mary Beth said that she had a 1 year old, she came across a 1 year old daughter called a spinster. Well, and I think Lisa, in the death notice that you showed,
Yes.
the guy was only 3 days old,
Right. And they said
and
bachelor.
he was still,
Yeah.
yeah, listed as a bachelor. Like, wow,
Yeah. And
yeah,
that's just basically you got to
a
put
red
something in that
tape kind of,
column,
yeah, yeah.
so that's just a formality, but still it sounds funny and it looks funny.
It
So
does, yeah, and the tragedy of it.
yeah, oh, yeah.
Yes. So look, I won't delay everyone, but thank you so much for joining. We'll keep this video on our YouTube channel and we'll put it on our Facebook, our website. And so, and please email Lisa or the museum or the society. If you've lost track of the emails, we'll help you out.
All right.
And hopefully, some of you have been able to see that link in the chat. But otherwise, we will give you the handout if you email us.
Yes, definitely. All right. Well,
Okay.
thank
Well,
you,
great
everyone.
seeing you. Yeah.
Good to see you
Thanks very
too.
much, everyone, for joining. And keep in touch.
Happy Memorial Day weekend.
Memorial Day. I know I forgot it was a holiday and I'm probably working because otherwise I
Oh,
would have gone to go to the beach somewhere, but it's too late now.
exactly.
So thanks, guys.
All right.
Take care.
Thank
Have a
you.
lovely weekend. Bye bye. Thank you.
All right. That worked out good.
Very good.
All right. Awesome. So
Uh,
I will see you one of these days. Do you ever get back up here or no?
yeah, I'll be up in June. I'm doing what am I doing? There's a history conference, so I'm moderating a panel at the State
Oh,
Museum. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Well,
So look,
good to see you.
yeah, you too. Thank you so much. And I will be in touch.
All right. Sounds great.
Take
Thank
care.
you.